Welcome. Today, we're going to be exploring some new research and some new data that came out of Employment Boost, talking about the great firing and how the great firing is upon us. I'm joined today by Ryan Miller, Director of Client Success at Employment Boost.
Happy to be speaking with you, Kane.
And James Phillip, startup investor and serial entrepreneur.
Ready to go, Kane.
And I'm Kane Carpenter. I'm the Director of Marketing at Employment Boost. Guys, I just wanted to bring you guys in to chat about this new report that we're coming out with and get your perspectives. James, I know you had maybe a question to lead us in.
Man, I got a lot of questions. So, Kane, I know you leave CNBC on or Bloomberg on all day, right? Probably Bloomberg. Like you're in there working, trading stocks, doing you stay busy. How much have you heard, I guess anywhere, of them talking about the layoffs right now?
No, very little. And if it is, it's very concentrated in one sector, if at all.
Tech, Facebook let go 100 janitors, and like it's never seemed to be anything meaningful other than you saw the major tech companies tighten their belt. But Ryan, what have you seen on the outplacement side in the last 45 days?
We've had a very large influx of outplacement inquiries, whether they've come from our clients whom we've worked with in the past or new inquiries of people that we've never worked with before. We've had an increase in sales of really over 100% on the outplacement side of things.
And that's like, we've been doing this for 20 years through multiple businesses, through 2000, 2001, 2008, 2009, a little bit during COVID there. And it's almost as if, whether it's on the consumer side or business side, we tend to see the market dip before everyone else catches up. And I feel like this is the case now where, I'm watching CNBC, I got Bloomberg on, I'm reading the websites, and there's some talk of it. But it's like, how do I hear our consumers saying, I'm out of a job, I just got laid off, I got let go. And then on the outplacement side, our phone's blowing up, our emails blowing up saying, hey, we're laying off 25, we're laying off 50, we're reduction in force for 100. How is it possible we have that significant of a blip, but it's not reflected on TV or on the unemployment numbers yet? Does anybody have an answer for that?
Makes you think.
It makes you think, so I don't think there's some grand conspiracy out there where everyone's like, shh, don't report those numbers. I just, when you look at the analysts and the economists and the professors, I just think they're always 60 or 90 days behind. Let's not forget in 2008, all the way up until the crash, people were on TV saying the economy was strong. 48 hours later, we found out it wasn't. And I'm seeing more and more of that. I mean, Ryan, when's the last time you've seen this many people lay off these larger numbers? It's about over 5 years ago, right?
Right. And I would also say, too, with their inquiries, there's also a pretty good degree of urgency. I would say maybe in the past, we've worked with clients who've had reductions in force that are very future planning. Okay, quarter one's coming up next year. We plan on, reducing this department, or we plan on making this organizational adjustment. For more of the inquiries that we've gotten recently within the past month and a half, it's, we're laying off 30 people on Tuesday, we're laying off 40 people next week, so that's also, a little bit different from what we've seen, but, companies still have that need to help those employees if they're reaching out to us and they still see a large reduction happening.
And I think that's the difference of what we've seen from, say, 2010 when things started to stabilize up until 2020. You had the executive, you had to let go, you had a department that didn't work out, or you outsourced, you let 5 or 10 people go. You didn't see this like mass quantity, or as you noted, it was, they're calling us in July talking about Q2 next year. It was, we're trying to trim up. We might be trying to sell the company for a strategic acquisition or maybe private equity. There's a merger going on, but everything was kind of strategic, or it was balance sheet cleanup, just kind of tightening everything up, planned out 6, hell, sometimes 12 months in advance. That's not the case right now. Like, what I know what you've been seeing is, yeah, this is going down in 5 days. It's as if they just got out of a meeting, and it's not even a knee-jerk reaction, because it's not, we're getting out of this meeting and we're going to do this, and then they change their mind. It's, no, this is happening Tuesday, and it's happening. And Kane, do you ever get the feeling, even just watching the stock market, for example, that people thought the party was never going to end?
Oh, 100%. 100%. And all of this kind of urgency, I think, is partially a function of cost of capital going up. The good times are over when it comes to kind of cheap money. And headcount is kind of the first thing to go.
Well, let's, when you start thinking, we can dig in this report a little bit here quickly.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about, when I'm talking to business owners right now, when they cringe when they talk about what they're paying for new hires. It's, someone that was maybe 80, they're now paying 115. Not the same person, as just one person left and the next person came in, high turnover. And now, their cost, and not only that, they're also saying that the productivity is lower. So they're hiring less productive people that are costing them more money. And you can see in their face that they don't want to do this, because it's going to run them out of business, right? Maybe not the Fortune 500s, but then it's going to eat in a margin, which means they are going to have to tighten the belt if they want to keep that stock price up. When you look at how much those salaries went up, you ask that question, it's like, well, what are you going to do? And it's like, well, if I could replace them with somebody cheaper, I would. So it's like the second that they get an opportunity to get this, in their mind anyways, person they're overpaying for off the books, they're going to do it. And I feel like you have some data here that represents that.
Yeah, right. And I think we run surveys all the time in Employment Boost, and it's rare, I think, or not, it's not that often that we see such strong kind of correlations and strong differences in results. So we asked our survey respondents, have you changed jobs in the last 12 months? We asked them, have you received a raise? And then, do you feel like your company is going to be conducting layoffs? And you can kind of see that the correlation is, the less experienced workers are the ones who have been most likely to have changed jobs in the last 12 months. They've been the most likely to have asked or received a raise. And subsequently, they're also the most likely to feel like their company is going to be conducting a layoff. There's also another correlation that is the less experienced workers also are the most likely to know somebody who's been laid off or been subject to a layoff in the last 6 months as well. So, James, if you don't mind, speak a little bit to kind of how 08 maybe factors into some of the decision making around maybe more experienced workers and why we're seeing this.
Yeah, and again, running career related companies for 2 decades, 3 recessions. It's like, we've been here, done that, got the t-shirt, started a t-shirt company. We've done it all. And you saw this stuff going on social media in the last 18 months, last 12 months, especially with the Great Resignation, and it was a badge of honor, right? And I'm thinking, I don't know if this is going to work out really well. I mean, Ryan, how do you think it's panning out right now?
Well, I can tell you from the conversations we've had with our outplacement recipients and the people we're providing services to, the vast majority of those employees have had shorter tenures with the organizations that they're being transitioned out of now. So they likely were participants within the Great Resignation, having joined the company very recently, that they're now being laid off from.
And it's really simple math. And again, I feel like you're always fighting the LinkedIn posters and TikTok with some of the stuff. And it's like, when you sit down in a boardroom with the people that are signing the checks, or the executive hiring committees, or the boards, the conversation does not reflect what you see on social media, which is why I say don't get your career advice from social media. But if you get into a hiring manager's head, or someone that's got P&L for their group or their team or whatever, as a recession hits, as a downturn comes, you start looking at, okay, I'm going to have to trim back either head count, salary, both. So if the new person on the block has an average tenure of 12 months and they've been here 6, and I got to lay somebody off, they start thinking, well, they've been here 6 months and they only usually stick around about 12. So in 6, you're going to have to replace in 6 months anyways. Or do you keep the other person who's been with the company for 5 years and plans on sticking around for a while? Sure, there's these questions of certain people can only do certain jobs and all that fun stuff, but let's just talk about the masses. When you're looking at someone who's going to be there, they have no loyalty, they're going to leave in 6 months anyways. Is anyone surprised that these are the people that are likely to get laid off first right now?
No. I mean, it kind of just makes common business sense.
It doesn't look like it's common sense on social media, though.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
And I've noticed it over the years of running, starting, investing in multiple companies. Your mind shifts when you come from a individual producer and you finally become that manager, and then the whole script flips and you start looking at it from a different perspective. And when you're just this individual producer, you're like, oh, 10 years, no big deal. You show up to your job, and now when you're that manager and you gotta constantly replace someone every 12 months. Kane, you'd appreciate this story. Ryan, you probably had similar run-ins in the last 12 months. I'm talking to a golf instructor and I'm inquiring about, well, once I sign up with you, is it just me and you for the next 3, 6, 12 months? Is it going to be whoever's available? Do you have high turnover? And he's like, I'm going to level with you, James. So we've had, we've lost 5 instructors in the last 6 months. We only added 3. So we don't have enough instructors right now. And the turnover is very high. So there's a high probability that you'd have a new instructor every 2 months. Do you think I signed up with them?
Doubt it.
Well, okay, we know the answer.
Yeah.
So I chose the guy down the road who just runs his own business, and I'm like on a wait list, but I'll be able to work with him consistently. Does anyone ever step back and say, maybe the customer doesn't have a fun time constantly having to deal with somebody new, for example? I don't want a new golf instructor every 6 weeks. So if you're, say you're like procuring something often from somebody and you get a new account manager every 3 months, how would you like that, Ryan?
It doesn't make you want to continue using the service. Also, it's going to raise questions of what's going on at that organization, that they can't retain employees. It causes you to second guess choosing that person as a vendor.
And that's where it's, you see all the stuff on social media. It's like, tenure doesn't matter, hop, 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 until you realize that companies don't like it. Managers don't like it. Executive, like no one likes it because it looks bad to the customer. It's really expensive to have to replace, train, and hire new people every 6, 9, 12 months. This is why companies care about tenure. No one listened. And then the cherry on top is where there's a slowdown, and there's always a next slowdown. We got spoiled there. We went a decade where things weren't too bad. And then COVID hit, we had this massive boom, and now we're kind of going into a potential bust. Did we think we were just going to keep hopping jobs for $5,000 or $10,000 and there was going to be no repercussion? And Kane, looks like this data is showing that the middle group of workers seems to get it, because I'm guessing they were probably old enough in 2008 to maybe be in the workplace, right?
Yeah,
35,
exactly.
35 to 44. So they probably experienced 2008. And we know the 45 to 54 definitely was. In fact, they've been through the 90s, they've been through it all. And you look at the 25 to 34-year-olds, I bet that skews even more if you look at like 18 to 25. They probably weren't really in the workplace, at least on the earlier side of that. I mean, what's it been? 14 years? You're 20 years old at 2008. You probably weren't in the workforce with a mortgage, a spouse, and like 2 kids at that point for most people.
Right.
When things were really bad. So you look at that, and of the 25 to 34-year-olds, right? You don't know what it was like, and you've never experienced a downturn. Only thing you really experienced was a steady line of growth from like 2010 up to COVID. And then it's like boom. Well, the other groups here are saying, yeah, I saw what happened in 2008, and they know who got laid off. Now, Ryan, you're working in the space. Once you're laid off, do you think that increases your value or decreases your value to the next employer?
Well, I can tell you, hiring managers, the first question they're going to give you on any interview is, what made you leave your last job? And then you have to come up with some kind of answer for that. And then, the bigger that gap happens between your last job and, your next job, it becomes more difficult to explain in an interview setting. So, layoffs happen on large scales, but if you have a better track record of tenure, kind of a more demonstrated history of staying power, those kinds of conversations come a little bit easier over time, because you've proven that you've had that ability to stay at an organization for a long time.
I mean, if you're at a company for 5 years and you're still there and you're applying for the next job, your value to that company on paper anyways looks extraordinarily more.
Absolutely.
Versus if you had, you job hopped every year and you've been unemployed for 6 months. And this is where I always say play the long game. The society today is a very short game. We're not thinking about tomorrow type of world. You got to get all the way through, right? You're going to probably work until you're 60, 65. What kind, the moves we made in the last couple of years, how's that going to benefit us when we're 40, 45 years old, for example? Now, we jumped around a little bit to get a few bucks during the Great, Resignation. But what is that going to cost you when you get laid off and you're out of work for 6 months? Well, A, you're not bringing in money for 6 months, so you probably just gave back every dime you made extra. And then when you go to get the next job, it's highly likely you're not going to get anywhere near what you were making at the job you got laid off from. And I just wonder, is anyone sitting around kind of, Kane, have you seen this with anyone? Is anyone sitting around Excel kind of mapping this out and making a strategic career decision? Or is it just, this sounds cool, let's do it?
Yeah. So that brings up a really interesting point that I wanted to pose to you both. But like, considering, so you brought up a point earlier, James, which is like, why is this not being covered as much as we're seeing it, play out in leads and in business? But is it because the media over the last 24 months has just kind of spread all this stuff about the virtue of the Great Resignation, everybody making a little bit more money, everybody making moves? I think there's like 4 million quits each month. I think that's pretty steady. Is it now that everybody's kind of handcuffed themselves into saying like, okay, we've spoken so highly of this, and now there's this downside to it, the inevitable downside that we would probably say, that they can't cover like they probably should?
I mean, no, it's, they certainly added some kerosene to the fire, right?
Right.
And again, it's we jump on America loves fads, the new fad, and well, now it looks looking like the great firing, which I don't think anybody wants to see. It's like we're all hoping we can keep the economy on track. Let's keep booming. It's just like again, we go back to what we're seeing on TV and what we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of people get laid off right now. And then this report in itself kind of shows you the people who job hop the most, that got the raises, are also the most worried. And I think the people that stuck around 3 or 4 or 5 years or more, I had a buddy that he was out there, looking at, he works for Fortune 100. He's out there getting offers from a lot of these, let's call them very hot EV companies, it's very smart, well-educated, highly desirable candidate that probably can get a job offer from anybody. Do you think he took any of those offers?
Hope not.
No,
No.
he stayed.
Yeah.
And he could be at these names, and you can take a guess what they name the biggest of the big, right? He decided to stay there, and it's like, do we ever go analyze the people who have the really successful careers? And we don't, right? It's, if I wanted to become a professional basketball player, I might study Jordan or LeBron. Am I going to go study the guy that only made it in the NBA for 2 years? And that's kind of, but that's kind of where we're at right now. And I tell people this story because it's like, my buddy probably could have jumped for like 50,000 more, maybe 75,000 more, plus a sign-on bonus. But he's smart enough to sit there and go, over a 5-year period, I know the raises are still coming here. I'm going to take this job. I could lose that job. Then I might have to go take another job that I don't want. Looking out 2 or 3 jobs down the line and say, sure, giving up some money today to probably be significantly more ahead in 60 months. That doesn't seem like people are thinking that way in that 25 to 34 year age group in this research report anyways.
Yeah. So you bring up an interesting idea there, James, and if you guys will indulge me, I prepared a little chart for us that talks about kind of the idea of being patient. Curious to know your thoughts here. So with the Great Resignation and how it seems like less experienced workers have managed to, jump a couple of jobs in the last 24 months and make a lot, or make a significant amount of money, maybe more, to 10, 20, 30, $40,000, whatever it is. So what's in front of you right now is kind of a very academic look at, or a theoretical look at, wages and productivity of the American kind of average worker. And for the longest time, this is called like a deferred compensation mental model. And the idea is that the corporation will typically undercompensate while people are less experienced, in contrast to productivity, so that they can overcompensate when they get a little bit more experienced and kind of approach retirement. It's kind of like this corporate America trade-off that's been unspoken for since the beginning of time, so to speak. But does that blue curve now look different because of the Great Resignation? Is the deal different now that we're signing on, as workers? Basically, like, what do you guys think of this curve, and what do you think our survey data means?
I mean, I got a couple thoughts. How old do you think Tim Cook is?
Oh, 50, 60? I don't know.
He's like 61 years old. I think his comp's around 15 million a year, right?
Okay.
Does that make sense looking at this chart? Do you think that Tim Cook, his productivity has gone down?
No.
And
That's
I
true.
get that this is probably averages. So if we're looking at someone that is a construction worker and you're 55, you probably can't hammer as much concrete as
There you go. Yep.
So I do understand that. But being on the side of, executive search, a lot of times I'm not looking for someone that's got 35 years of experience that is going to blast out Excel documents all day.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking for 30 years of expertise that they don't have to figure it out. They just have the answers. So how do you measure the productivity of a controller or a CFO when they're sitting in meetings half the day, right? So I can see where this data gets skewed in that sense. I believe you end up in the end, you don't pay for productivity, you pay for the expertise. I pay for solutions. I pay for people that have the answer. And I look at earlier on in the chart here, they say, what'd you say that use the words undercompensate?
Mm-hmm.
See, I don't necessarily believe that, because when you talk to, especially the large companies, even the Fortune 5s, if you talk to managers there, when people are coming out of college, they have an education, right? and they can do the math, let's say, but they actually have no skills to do the job. So are they technically, is that being undercompensated if you have no skills to do a job, for example? So that's where I just tend to disagree.
Mhm.
And as people get the skills and thrive, they tend to rise rather quickly when it comes to wage. But I get what you're saying right now, in a sense. Now you have the least productive people because they don't even know how to do the job. And they're also some of the highest paid.
Yeah, exactly.
So when it comes to a downturn or recession, who do you think goes first?
100%. Exactly. Like businesses are not foolish enough to let that, for example, like let the blue line be above the orange line for the entire tenure of a worker, right? Like they're not that foolish. So that's a really interesting point, because if people that are on the lower end of that curve, young, less experienced, are making more than their productivity, maybe, that can't work either, right? That doesn't make much sense from a capitalistic standpoint.
I mean, imagine that you just got out of college and you started working for an aerospace company, and you're working in procurement as a buyer, and you got to go buy a certain kind of, I don't know, you got a certain kind of metal, as an Iconel or something. How much do you think that person actually knows about procuring that particular material?
Great
So,
point. Very little.
So who do you think they have to go ask to learn how to procure that type of material correctly and make sure it's the right metal? So, the plane doesn't break apart in midair, right? They got to go ask the people that are further down this curve, who've been there, done that for 5, 10, 15, 25 years. And I think that's where things are out of whack right now.
Yeah.
Ryan, have you been anywhere lately where it seems like people just don't know what they're doing?
It's actually most places nowadays.
And I've used this example with Kane. And I said, 2 times in 1 week, I was at a business and I asked about something and I got the response, "I don't know, I'm new here." And I'm like, okay, so now that I have that information, what am I supposed to do? It's now they got to go ask the person that. So we have a warm body here that is able to breathe air and take up 3 to 4 square feet of space. But they don't really know how to do anything. They have to go ask the person that's been there 10 years to even do some of the most remedial things. And it's like, well, this person really can't do much. And they probably had to pay them quite a bit just to get them to show up to work. How do you think this ends if we do go into a real recession?
I think we're starting to see the start of that with Ryan, what you're seeing with the outplacement, and then in terms of what we're seeing with this survey data. I think, I think that's such an important point, that for the last 24 months, companies have been so desperate to hire that they're almost willing to hire anybody, which then speaks to actually something about the labor force that's available that is probably potentially concerning too, and maybe something we can look into. But the kind of worker that is still available on the market, considering the dynamics at play here.
Like, Ryan, I'm sure some of those bad experiences have been in hospitality, right?
Correct. Absolutely. Even just the most basic example of service at a restaurant, we go back maybe 6, 7 years. There's a chance that your waiter had a bachelor's degree and was just kind of paying their way, while they were looking for a job that was in their field. And it was service that was excellent. You could tell that this person was educated and, really kind of took the job seriously. And nowadays it's just, there's not that buy-in from the employee as much, at least from my experience in the hospitality world.
I mean, if you go back 5 or 6 years, you and I were having lunch at J. Alexander's in Troy, and our server had I think he said he was an architect that went to U of M.
Yes.
And there just was no no jobs for him. I think we ran out into someone else that was like in petroleum engineering or something. Like it was just way different 5 or 6 years ago. I was telling Kane a story this morning. I was trying to get a tire plugged in a car because I didn't feel like, if they're close, I'll plug them myself. This one I got to pull the wheel off. I'm like, I'm just gonna go discount tire. Call discount. It's like, well, can you just set up an appointment? I'll drop the car off. And they go, well, we're not taking appointments to patch tires anymore. And I'm like, all right, well, cool. You told me, whatever. Can I just drop the car off? And well, we prefer that you stay with your car. And I'm like, well, how long is that going to be? And like, 2 to 3 hours. And I'm just like, maybe I will pull the tire off and patch it myself. But the guy goes on to say, what's funny is because I've been going to this discount tire for a long time, and custom ordering tires. They know who I am. And it's like, funny enough, we've gone from not having enough workers to having plenty. He's like, but the problem is no one knows what they're doing. So so now I start questioning, well, where are these people coming from? I'm guessing they left another job somewhere to go work at Discount Tire. But obviously that's not exactly their forte to, rip rims and tires off cars all day and do this type of thing. So what's going on in the marketplace that we're not seeing on TV from the analysts and the economists that's talking about this? As long as that employment number is good, everyone seems to cheer. But we're just, if you're living life, you see what's going on. There is a fundamental shift right now. So Ryan, who do you think ends up at Discount Tire if they're not kind of like mechanically inclined to begin with?
People who were leaving other businesses and were not able to carve out a career elsewhere.
Are they maybe desperate?
Right.
So it's we'd all know those people that they just like doing that stuff. They would have no problem functioning in that environment. So I had to start asking my question, well, who ends up at Discount Tire that doesn't know what they're doing? I know you got to get trained and go through everything. You start looking at this and it's like, wow, what shift's going on right now? It's like everything in the economy. We tend to figure out what was happening now 6 months from now. I just think we have some signs that are happening right in front of our faces that no one's really talking about. And I think Kane's got some data here that kind of proves it.
Yeah. I think our entire survey is quite indicative of this trend. We're seeing more layoffs. That's evidenced by Ryan's kind of busyness on dealing with outplacement recipients and outplacement customers coming to him. We're seeing more concern with less experienced workers around layoffs and potential layoffs. And we think that that's a function of really the less experienced workers having changed jobs in the last 12 months, and then also being the cohort that's received the most in terms of wage gains over the last 12 months. So I think that the data is pretty clear.
And it's a completely different situation and market, but it does remind me of like 2006. And you saw all these people that were in the mortgage industry, anything to do with it, the appraisers, underwriters, loan brokers, anybody that was associated with homes was making like astronomical amount of money. And I'm thinking like, the job you're doing used to pay like 50, and now they're making like 150, 200. And they're out there buying cars and homes like they're going to make 150 or 200 forever. And I remember this pretty clearly because you start running into people, people, their family that rode that bubble. It's like, so if this thing pops, back then, Kane, 20-25 million dollar company, we're hiring, CEOs for 225. But you're making 200, pushing mortgages.
Right.
So you start asking people, Employment Boost does career coaching and planning. You start asking people, well, let's just say that this party ends. what other job are you going to do? What are you capable of doing, skill wise, education wise, that is going to pay you $200,000 a year? And you realize, you know how many people had an answer to that?
Very few.
None.
Yeah.
Because, you know, they're getting paid more than a CFO is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they thought the party was never going to end. And, you know, the party always ends. And I'm really afraid that's where we're at right now, where I think people thought they were just going to keep jumping around and get 5 or 10 grand every year. And if you did it enough, you would turn that $80,000 job into a $160,000 job. But then when you look at that line there, that shows they're also the most worried about layoffs. Again, if you think about it, if you doubled your salary anywhere, would you not sit around and go, am I safe?
Yeah, for sure. Even just thinking about your day to day, that hasn't changed that much, and you're making double the money.
Not for extra education, not because you have some extra KPIs or metrics you hit, for essentially just being the same person, and your salary starts going up, 10, 15, 20%. And then you do another job, and then it gets compounded there, and then another 15 or 20%. But you don't really bring more to the table.
And at some point, you can't keep saying inflation.
Yeah, inflation's very legitimate. I understand why we got to top jobs. Inflation's a massive issue. So I can't actually blame people for saying, hey, I need more money, I got to hop. But after you hop 2 times and you get 15, 20%, and then another 15 or 20 on top of that, but you're not bringing more to the table. And then, there's, Kane, didn't you say that worker productivity is at some crazy low since 1947?
Something like that. I think so. Yeah, it's definitely low.
We were talking about it. Maybe it's another article. It's low.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, salaries are crazy high and productivity is super low. How could I sit there and say, oh, I got my salary up 40% in the last 24 months, and then actually think that, my head's not going to be on the chopping block when a downturn comes?
Yeah.
That sound right, Ryan?
I think it's, with the more you play the market, the more vulnerable you are to the market for when it changes. So for these situations you're describing where people are taking advantage of, record low job candidate demand, and are saying, well, that's what the market indicates, so that's what I'm worth, instead of, just pure skill set, education, certifications that they bring to the table, they do leave themselves vulnerable for when things do change. And as you mentioned, they always do. they go back and forth. So you can really, the one thing you should really be worrying about as a worker is how much value can I bring to an organization, instead of what is the market dictating I am.
If you keep bringing value, your value keeps increasing.
Exactly.
That's, you look at anyone that was very successful in their career, the game's not that hard. But, something you said about like what's your current worth, or what you're worth with the current market. I always look at it like the Uber drivers. When it's raining, all of a sudden it's really more expensive. Do you sit back and think that you're going to keep getting paid that same amount when it's sunny out? What do they call that? Surge pricing or something?
Yeah.
Yes.
I got hit with it in Chicago, I think, once, and I'm like, all right, next time I'll buy an umbrella. It's just, again, that long-term planning. Anyways, we'll see what's going to happen next 12 months. I mean, Ryan, what do you, or both of you, when do we see this thing peak, or do you think it's going to go on for a while?
So on a year-to-year basis, layoffs happen the most in 2 months, December and January. So we're obviously approaching that. Companies wrapping up their end of year and then setting the new budgets for the following year. So compounding that with the current way things are going, it's difficult for me to say that layoffs are going to be ceasing anytime soon. Who knows what can happen, but if we're going off of just historical trends and when we see the most activity, it's typically at the very end and the very beginning of the year. So I think we're going to be seeing this influx for quite a while.
Professor Carpenter, what do you think?
Similar sentiment. I think as long as the Fed is still trying to fight inflation, it's, the different costs of capital, the different ways that companies are dealing, or the way that kind of money influences different industries. So we're going to see different industries get affected at different times. And I think we've got a 12, 18, 24-month runway here of this kind of stuff happening, more than people probably think it is.
I mean, we're still looking at potential earnings adjustments coming. And then Powell was talking about getting unemployment up to the 4 point something, 4 or 5. We got a little ways to go before we get up there. And then if you see earnings crash, who knows what's going to happen. So, we'll see. Again, I'd rather things stay booming. It's hard to ignore the layoffs. This data, you kind of see where the candidate sentiment is right now.
Yeah.
It's getting a little harder to deny, especially as we see the velocity of layoffs increasing. So maybe we'll loop back around here at the end of the year, Ryan. And when we get some more data, maybe December and January, we'll do a follow-up episode.
Certainly.
All right. Well, I will catch you gentlemen later.
Thank you.
Thank you.